In today's society, diversity and inclusion are hot topics. But are we doing enough to ensure that these values are truly embedded in our systems and institutions? The topic of Session 3 is Welcoming Diversity and Inclusion. Nicholas Allen, Chairman and Independent Non-Executive Director at Link Asset Management Limited, introduces the concept of cynicism and how it relates to the belief that human behaviour is entirely self-serving. Then he discusses the importance of government, corporations and individuals all working together to achieve real progress.
It's great to be back at another Hong Kong CGI conference and the very important topic of diversity and inclusion. I'm going to come at this topic somewhat tangentially. I want to establish the real problem that we want diversity and inclusion to address. So please bear with me. And also please bear with a certain cynicism which unfortunately pervades my thinking. As my cynicism is present through these remarks, I would like to explain what a cynic is, and by doing so ensure one positive outcome from my talk, that is an improvement in your knowledge of ancient Greek history. A cynic is someone who believes that human conduct is motivated wholly by self-interest. The most famous of the cynics, and the philosopher from whom they took inspiration, was Diogenes of Sinope. Diogenes was born in around 404 BC and lived his adult life in Athens and Corinth. The term cynic derives from the ancient Greek kynikos, dog-like. It seems Diogenes was proud to be known as the dog. He considered dogs superior to the vain, acquisitive human race. Like a dog, Diogenes said, I fawn on those who give me anything, I bark at those who refuse, and I set my teeth in rascals. The tangential debate which has my cynical focus at the moment is how to get individuals, the man or woman on the street, the consumer, to make the real sacrifices necessary to solve the genuinely earth-threatening problems of today. I am weary and genuinely worried that the message for consumers is doing things voluntarily is fine and will solve these problems, when in reality, to achieve these solutions, it is going to require a significant shift in every consumer's behaviour that can really only be achieved by well-thought-through and well-communicated policies, accompanying regulations, and enforcement thereof. Only with this will it be possible to overcome the too widespread a view among consumers that the job of saving the planet, of bringing in greater diversity, of achieving social change is a job for others, for the government, for corporates, and not primarily for the individual me, or only for the individual me on a voluntary basis only. Now, bringing this back to the corporate stage, what role should businesses and what role should all of us involved in business play in this? Making genuine progress requires three parts of society working in harmony for the same goals. Governments in setting policies and regulations, businesses in adopting genuine and realistic strategies and objectives to achieve both financial and non-financial outcomes, and individuals in changing their lifestyles to adopt new behaviours. In the case of governments, I observe the majority of governments unprepared to take hard decisions that will be unpopular with individuals. A few examples. The dial back of fossil fuel transition plans when faced with the energy market turmoil following Russia's Ukraine invasion. The lack of appetite to genuinely reallocate government resources, thereby raising taxes or reducing government spending elsewhere, to facilitate the rebuild of vital infrastructure, power grids, water systems, waste disposal, to a level where countries can really change gear and start to achieve the outcomes the planet needs. The lack of preparedness on the part of developed nation governments to provide aid and support to developing nation governments so that they can achieve the outcomes needed. This has been much touted at COP events and yet nothing really achieved. So we need to keep pressure on governments. Thank you, NGOs. Bringing this back to corporates, what role can they play in trying to bring these three key strands together? Well, a better role than they're playing currently. The cynic in me comes through again, and I see the corporate world broadly as playing the concerned global citizen game, some very well. I'm aghast at the extent of greenwashing all around me by many B2C corporates who spin activity to present their green credentials to individual customers, who wish their consciences to be salved without changing their behaviours or having any of their individual rights curtailed. I would like to paraphrase a Friends of the Earth paper on the subject: the harm caused by the offsetting con. The promotion and use of offsetting has consequences. Carbon offsets are cheap when compared with many real carbon mitigation measures that may require expensive upfront investments, even if they pay for themselves over time and/or bring other non-financial benefits, such as reduced air pollution. This carbon pricing reality means that carbon offsets should not be reserved for, i.e. matchable to, residual emissions, i.e. those emissions that can't be reduced using technical or behavioural solutions. One reason that carbon offsets are cheap is that the need for carbon to be locked up for hundreds of years is ignored. In other words, offsets are sold regardless of whether or not they work over the long term. Within business, as within government, it is often those in charge of the money who limit spending on climate and nature measures and who will be attracted by the much cheaper carbon offsetting deception. Researchers have estimated how the presence of offsets, potential future availability of offsets, and other means of drawing carbon out of the atmosphere create a mitigation deterrent, which can deter or delay actions to reduce emissions. In the worst-case scenario, the promise of offsetting schemes and other carbon removal approaches, according to researchers, could lead to an additional 1.4 degrees of global heating, which would be catastrophic. The researchers make clear that this isn't just about cost, although that is certainly significant. Offsetting and the potential for it in the future provides governments, businesses, and individuals with a way to avoid challenging decisions. They can also put off efforts to explore technologies and new approaches. Mitigation deterrence is not the only harm offsetting can have. The projects themselves can be detrimental. For example, forest offsets can lead to trees being planted in the wrong place. There is a history of carbon offsets displacing local communities and indigenous peoples through land grabs and exclusions, despite evidence that indigenous and tribal peoples are central to maintaining the integrity of forest environments. I wanted to quote 3 examples of corporates playing the game well that caught my attention. Firstly, Snowy Hydro and the Sydney Rail System. The Sydney Rail System, at the stroke of a pen, in agreement with Snowy Hydro to use its carbon-neutral energy, declared itself carbon neutral despite emitting 700,000 tonnes of emissions each year. Net benefit to the planet? More than 450 finance companies accounting for $130 trillion of assets have joined the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. The initiative, which was announced with great fanfare at last year's COP Summit, is spearheaded by former UK Bank of England Governor and Brookfield Asset Management Executive Mark Carney, alongside ex-New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg and former Securities and Exchange Commission Chair Mary Shapiro. Now they are finding that they are likely to ask a significant number of members to leave as they try mildly to enforce such behaviours. I've just been away on holiday. The hotel I stayed at told me that my stay was carbon neutral because they charge an extra $US a day to plant a tree. The critical concept is additionality. I repeat, additionality. What additional benefits arise? And I also wanted to call out the big kick of the can down the road. It used to be CCS, carbon capture and storage, and now it is hydrogen, whether green, blue, turquoise or brown. The new technologies which haven't arrived at scale yet, and may well not, but which are trumpeted as big solutions, so enabling governments not to ask individuals to do anything other than voluntary actions. Do I have any positive examples to set against all these negative ones? On a positive note, I'd like to reference the Swiss system of waste management of an example of how something good could work. Anyone who has lived in Switzerland knows the real pain of complying with waste separation laws and the consequences of failing to do so. Your individual rights are curtailed, but the system achieves very significant recycling targets and reduction in the volume of waste going to landfill. So this is the point where my discourse comes back to the topic in hand. What are the corporate governance choices, particularly around inclusion and diversity, that might contribute to stopping this nefarious activity and lead to the genuine solutions we need? How is it that governance structures might facilitate this? It is necessary for many more people who genuinely understand and get the vital importance of achieving real goals to have a seat at the corporate table. Those who do have a seat at the table should be properly educated and briefed so they too can get the issues. In practical terms, this translates into what experience, skills we look for, train for. When recruiting, whether it be at board, executive or entry level, diversity of background and gender are key to inculcating a culture of meeting a set of nuanced and often non-financial outcomes and not just the black and white financial goals of corporates. When educating, training, life skills developing for our workforces, making sure critical topics, subjects remain at the forefront of education. That is creating a culture of aspiring to real achievement and not spin, really walking the talk. What will we achieve when we have the right people in place? Can the corporate world be the hub for promoting individual activities? And if so, how? Corporate intolerance of certain behaviours will concentrate customer minds and make it more palatable for customers, employees and other stakeholders to make necessary sacrifices. Small steps now from my business world, green leases in the property world, getting tenants to sign up to green behaviours, promoting employee volunteer work, recycling, work-life balances, genuine education and not PR puff, enabling and accepting realistic views from investors and stakeholders. So this is what I see are the real reasons why diversity and inclusion is so important and why we must work towards it all together. Thank you.
Ms. Bonnie Y. Chan, currently Co-COO, shares her views during the conference in her previous role as Head of Listing at Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing Limited. In 2019, HKEX became the first jurisdiction to require all listed companies to have a diversity policy. She also shares other measures taken by HKEX to promote diversity and inclusion.
Here I am to talk about our regulatory approach to diversity and inclusion. I think I don't really need to preach to this group what the benefits are for a company which is diverse. A diverse company is naturally more innovative, more intuitive and resilient. It also helps improve companies in terms of their ability to listen to their customers and other stakeholders and understand their needs. I mean, that will also bring about additional benefits such as the ability to retain better talent, which I'm sure a lot of you are currently having a lot of trouble with finding talents to do the jobs in your company, and also fostering the next generation of leaders. So HKEX, obviously, we're in a very unique position given our role as both a regulator, a listed company, as well as a market operator. And we do understand that given that very unique role, we have the ability to extend influence beyond simply just our shareholders. And we do, strive to foster a diverse and inclusive culture across our business, the workplace, but more importantly, broadly, the community. Why don't I talk about how we try to set an example and guide the 2,500 plus listed companies on our exchange? I've tried to summarize the journey so far. We started about 10 years ago. And the first thing we did was obviously to promote the high standards of a responsible corporate governance by advocating for the introduction of strong corporate governance and ESG disclosure. Disclosure is obviously important because you do need to express and articulate what you're doing. So since we introduced the board diversity concept framework in 2013, We keep pushing out new rule enhancements and market education efforts to help ensure that we maintain the standard and market attractiveness. Now, we reached a very, very important milestone in 2019 when we made Hong Kong the first jurisdiction to require that all listed companies to have a diversity policy. I mean, it seems a little mind-boggling that it's 2019 and we were the first, but indeed that was the case. And then we extended our efforts to listing applicants because we understand, right, that's the pipeline. These will be the future listed companies. And what we do is that we started requiring listing applicants with single gender boards to explain the measures that it has put in place to achieve gender diversity. So at the point of time in 2019, we were still allowing companies with a single gender board to apply. However, I'll tell you later that that has changed. So we wanted to start at that position, and we keep conditioning issuers to embrace changes. So a lot has to do with the education that we've put in place. Directors training program covering board diversity. We issue a lot of guidance to boards and directors. And we also hosted what we call an ESG Academy with a lot of webinars on corporate governance, diversity and inclusion and similar topics to help issuers explore practical ways to achieving board diversity. Again, I mention over and over again that we have a unique position as regulators to become the change agent. And so we reached yet another milestone with the introduction of a number of new rules, especially coming into effect this year. Our latest corporate governance requirements focus on promoting board refreshment as well as better diversity within the boardroom and across the whole organization. So let me go into a bit of details with this slide. We all agree that a listed company board needs to have the right mix of individuals, and Nick mentioned it earlier. We want a diverse set of talents, experience, objectivity, and that will strengthen a company's ability to manage challenges within the company and the industry that they are in. So our latest requirements promote a few things. Basically, board diversity through 3 pillars. First of all, more regular board refreshment, and then strengthen the role of nomination committee, as well as banning single gender boards. So how does that work? First of all, listed companies has a board with all the INEDs, where all the INEDs are long-serving, and by long-serving, the definition is INEDs who have served more than 9 years. They will be required to appoint a new INED, so at least there is refreshment. This will aim to ensure new perspectives will be available to the board and will break down the tendency towards a groupthink. And we believe this is particularly important in Hong Kong, where we know there are a lot of family-founded companies which tends to rely on a pretty tight inner circle of advisors and board members. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar, recognizing the important role played by the nomination committee, we make nomination committee mandatory. So it's a must for all listed companies. And the nomination committee must be chaired by an INED, and the majority of that committee also must be INEDs. This, we believe, will ensure proper oversight over the director's nomination and recruitment process, and therefore be more conducive in promoting diversity and succession planning. Last but not the least, the third pillar. We took a very big step forward by calling an end to single gender board. And by that, it's not comply on explain, it's mandatory. A lot of you will be under the impression that, well, but some other jurisdiction is already mandating 30%, 40%. In fact, most of those jurisdictions follow a comply or explain model. Hong Kong is one of the very few. I think there are only us in Singapore with a mandatory requirement of no single gender board. So that is a big step we've taken. A few years ago, when we begin to require applicants, I mentioned earlier, to explain how they plan to achieve gender diversity, we begin to see the dial move a little bit. But now that we've made it mandatory, we are seeing real sort of improvement in numbers. First of all, new applicants with 1 or more female directors have risen by 14.2% in the past 3 years. And under our requirements, which became effective July 1st, new listing applicants in Hong Kong must have at least 1 female director on board. So what does that mean? That means if you file an A1 application with me, And when my team take a look at it and there is no female on the board, director on the board, we'll return it. We will simply not accept your application. And therefore, while I show the three color bars, a rise of 14.2% in 3 years, I can tell you that going forward, that's 100%, because nobody will be able to apply for a listing if they have a single gender board. Now, since 2019, all listed issuers are already required to have a board diversity policy. That's what I mentioned earlier. For the listed issuers who still only have a single gender board, under the new requirements, they will need to appoint at least one female director by 2024. And we've calculated there are about 800 or so within the 2,500, which at the moment still have a single gender board. Now, we do want to make sure that this is not simply a check-the-box exercise, that people don't simply bring on a female director for compliance of our no single gender board requirement. We have given 3 years for these companies to find the right candidate, and in the process of doing so, we hope that they will focus on the necessary skills, experience, caliber appropriate to their own businesses. And we do want to also impress upon listed issuers that diversity should be a continuous journey, meaning that don't think that we're here today ending single gender boards. So long as I put one woman on the board, my business is done. This will be a continuous journey, and everyone in the audience can continue to provide us at the exchange with additional ideas, and which will inform the direction of travel for further improvements. So besides rule and regulations, we also help companies take the next step in their diversity journey by providing them information. This is very important, data. And we launch a new repository on board diversity and inclusion in focus in April, which aims to improve transparency around board diversity and enabling investor and other stakeholders to stay informed. Now, this is actually quite a lot of fun. For those of you who have not done it, you can get onto this centralized portal or platform, and you can compare information such as age, gender, years of tenures of board of directors on Hong Kong listed issuers board. And you can do so by selecting industry, for example, so that you can benchmark against other comparable companies in the same sector. And this will create, hopefully, the transparency, first of all, but maybe some peer pressure, right? So that people understand if I don't do well, I could be named and shamed. And I would say, since we've done all these, improvements has been quite obvious. As of the end of August, single gender boards has dropped by 2.7%. And for IPO applicants, I mentioned the numbers, but like I said, it will become 100% no single gender boards going forward. And also, just to wrap up, 26.5% of our IPO applicants in 2022 managed to have actually 30% female directors on the board. So I think that's a good achievement. Now, having spoken about how we can help change the situation as a regulator, I also want to maybe spend a minute or two to talk about how we, as a corporate, HKEX, walk the walk. Obviously, diversity is very important, and it's one of our core values in our corporate, and we do make sure that we practice it. We offer advocacy and training programs for our employees. Just to sort of give you an examples of how we practice it, obviously, you are all very familiar that we do have a female chairman, Mrs. Laura Cha, who was appointed to our board as the chairman in 2018, and at the moment, 4 out of 13 of our board members are women. The London Metal Exchange, which is one of our major subsidiaries, also appointed their first female board chair in 2019, and they have set a target of having 40% of their senior leadership roles filled by women by 2025. As a company, over 41% of the staff at HKEX are women, and they hold about 36% of senior management positions. I do want to call out my own team listing. We actually have more women than men. 65% of my team are women, and in fact, out of the 8 departments I run, 6 of them are led by women. So, I do practice it myself. We do engage in a lot of programs and networks to offer support to our staff and giving them more opportunities to support these very important initiatives, be it diversity, as in Women's Network, LGBT, people with different abilities. And these are just examples of the things we do. So I would just want to wrap up by maybe asking all of you to continue to put pressure on me, like Nick did just now. Give us ideas. Give us ideas how we can better improve. Like I said, we only started the journey in earnest about a decade ago, but through these little steps, we think we are making progress. And as we continue the journey, your support is important. Your ideas are very, very important. And so please do let us know where you think we should be heading. Thank you.
In today's globalized economy, the competition for investment, capital raising, and fund management is international. Hong Kong's continuing success as a financial hub in China, in the Asia-Pacific region, and globally means that our competitive edge must be constantly sharpened. The topic of Session 4 is Enhancing Hong Kong's Competitive Advantage. Amar Gill, Managing Director and Head of APAC Investment Stewardship from BlackRock, shares suggestions on what Hong Kong needs to do to continue to be a leader in environment, social and governance in the region and globally.
I came to Hong Kong initially to work in 2001. We've lived here now for almost 20 years. We went to Singapore for a few years. We came back 10 years ago. So I have worked, 2/3 of my working career has been in Hong Kong. And I'd like to say at the outset that I think it would be a gross mistake to underestimate Hong Kong. Hong Kong has huge advantages that, the way I see it, the enterprising people, the magnet for talent, the international and deep pool of capital and the free flow of capital, the physical infrastructure, the commercial infrastructure, and the super connectivity with China, with the rest of the world. These are major, major advantages, especially as in the coming years, China will become the largest economy in the world. And that continues to give Hong Kong huge opportunities that I believe it will build on its advantages to grab those opportunities. So in relation to that, what I should like to do is to talk a little bit about BlackRock, firm I work for, what we're doing on stewardship and sustainability, and to offer some suggestions on what Hong Kong needs to do to continue to be a leader on ESG in the region and globally. So I'll try and be very quick on what BlackRock is doing and a bit of background on BlackRock. BlackRock was established in 1988. In just over 30 years, it's become the largest asset manager globally, $8.5 trillion as at middle of 2022. We have clients in over 100 countries. Among the clients are central banks and sovereign funds in over 100 countries. And we have over 1 billion individuals, savers and retirees who are our clients through the products that we offer. In terms of assets, approximately half of our assets is in public market equities. And in that public market equities, 90%, $4 trillion give or take, is in so-called passive strategies. In other words, we follow the indices. Even though we have a passive approach in terms of stock selection in these passive strategies, our stewardship is still very active, and I'll go through that in a second. But I think first it's worth highlighting that the capital, the assets that we have, is not our money. It is not BlackRock's capital. It's not BlackRock's assets. It's our clients' assets. And so we have a strong fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of our clients. We take that responsibility very seriously. So we have this investment stewardship team, which I lead for the region here in APAC, 70 people globally, 21 now in Asia Pacific, in Tokyo, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Australia. We do the voting for BlackRock portfolios. And to shape our decisions on how to vote for BlackRock, we have engagement meetings with senior representatives of corporates, CEOs, CFOs, heads of sustainability, sometimes chairmen and directors. And we use those meetings to get an idea and perspective from the company on its policies and how it sets its policies on sustainability, on governance, on human capital management, on succession, remuneration, etc. And we undertake something like 3,000 engagement meetings a year globally, and about 1,000 plus in Asia Pacific. And we have to do that for all the voting we do globally. And BlackRock has about 17,000 meetings, AGMs and EGMs, that we have to vote on each year. So we take this fiduciary responsibility and the voting responsibility on behalf of our clients very seriously. This is the size of the team that we have across the markets, which I mentioned already. We are asking these companies to improve and provide transparency on how they are navigating the transition. And essentially, we're looking for TCFD disclosures, which I'm sure everybody here is quite familiar with. Governance, risks, strategy, and metrics and targets. And the metrics and targets that we're looking for, long-term targets, but 2050, 2060, how many of us will still be around in the jobs we have? We're also looking for medium-term targets. Over the next 10 years to 2030, what are companies planning to do? However, the biggest issue that we are voting against companies on in this region is on the G topic, governance. If you look at independence, the second column that we have on this chart, we voted against 1,100 companies in Asia Pacific for not having sufficient independence on the board. And that is 1/4 of our total company exposure in Asia Pacific that we voted against on independence. So that, I think, it's a major issue that I will come to in terms of our recommendations. So I've only got 5 minutes. I've got 10 recommendations. I've got 2 minutes per recommendation. Let me try and go through this very, very quickly. And I would have to emphasize at the outset, these are based on my personal observations, of course, my working experience. Most of this is in line with BlackRock's philosophy and policies, but I'm speaking at this, on this chart in terms of my personal views. The first 4 of the suggestions that I have here essentially are what companies can do irrespective of the regulatory environment. And the first thing that I would put is the sustainability reports and connection of sustainability reports with the CEO statement and the chairman's statement. Very often, you will see the sustainability report. It is in the annual report, but page 40 or behind. And when you look at the CEO statement or the chairman's statement, there's no reference, or maybe one line on what the company is doing on sustainability. As I was mentioning earlier on TCFD, what we think is integral is sustainability issues have to be part of company strategy. It has to be something that the CEOs and the chairman want to describe what the company is doing. And that is one of the things that we would urge companies to do, to put it up front rather than back down in the annual reports, for instance. Board practices. And here the tenure of independent directors is one of the issues for Hong Kong and a number of other markets. Quite often you have independent directors in Hong Kong who've been on the board for 15 years or 20 years and still classified as independent. Many times they do have the skills that are required, but we think that if they're still needed on the board, they should be reclassified as non-independent because they've already developed the relationship with the controlling shareholder, with management, and they've also been part of the policy making over the last 10 years or so. And so we think tenure of directors is a key issue on independence. And similarly, the chairman of the nomination committee has to be unquestionably independent, not a long-tenured independent director to make sure that the other nominees are okay by the controlling shareholder. The third issue is on diversity, and we have had a panel to talk about it. And I would say that Hong Kong is making advances on diversity, which Bonnie Chan of Hong Kong Exchange was talking about. There's been improvement. And right now, the statistic is that for Hang Seng Index, 17% of the directors are women. But 17%, and that compares with about 14% 3 or 4 years ago. Still, 17% translates to about 1 or 2 women on the board on average. We think that if diversity is going to make a meaningful impact, it has to move a little bit beyond tokenism. And that is why BlackRock is a member of the 30% Club in Hong Kong, as well as most of the other markets in the region. And the fourth issue, I think is probably the most important issue on tackling the independence, which is having a lead independent director whose responsibility it is to interact with investors and shareholders. The issue right now is most companies have a chairman who's not independent. Sometimes the chairman meets with the investors and sometimes they don't. But investors do not get to meet the independent directors. So you think about it. The independent directors know that they are on the board with the consent of the controlling shareholders. And they sit on the board 4 to 8 times, various meetings with the chairman, with the controlling shareholders and management. But they have no interaction with the other shareholders, with the other investors. How can they be expected to be truly independent? And so I would put, as Bonnie, I will go back to Bonnie just now asking for suggestions. And I think the single most important thing that Hong Kong can do to improve independence is to have lead independent directors interacting with investors and stewardship teams. I have now got 1 minute for 6 more topics. 6 more. And most of these are on the environmental side. I think there's a role for asset managers and asset owners as well. Asset managers need to have at least a stewardship manager, if not a stewardship team, so that the asset managers, when they have their meetings with the companies, are not just talking about how's business going. Is your next 6 months results going to be better than expectations, or have there been trouble and likely disappointment? That is what most meetings of investors with corporates are about. But when you have stewardship teams, then you have to be talking about ESG, you have to be talking about long-term sustainability. And I think that's a responsibility that the asset managers and asset owners have to play, each one of them in Hong Kong. We also need to develop a roadmap for unlisted companies, because Scope 3 will not make any headway unless listed companies are able to get the emissions data from the unlisted companies, the SMEs. And one way of getting the SMEs on the transition pathway is to at least have a database of their electricity consumption as a starting point. And you have that database of what SMEs are doing, and then the listed companies would be able to look at what their scope, have a better information and data on their Scope 3 emissions. And then 2 other points. We have sustainability reports essentially produced by sustainability consultants, but there's a big difference between the sustainability consultants and the auditors. The auditors have an audit oversight body that essentially ensures that auditors are following minimum standards. But for sustainability reports, it's all out there. The standards can vary from one sustainability assessor to another. So I think sustainability reports also need an oversight body to ensure minimum standards are being followed. And finally, assessors for labor practices. This is an issue across the region, labor rights, human rights. To have credibility for the customers and for the investors, we need independent external assessors that Hong Kong as a hub can provide for the region. So that very quickly is 10 recommendations. For a lot of these recommendations and for a lot of these issues, I'm not an expert, I'm more an observer. But I think Hong Kong has huge opportunities. It is already an eminent financial center. as it builds on its advantages, it can be a world-class financial center. Thank you very much.
Thank you.